So finally, we move on to our last week looking at Sartre's Existentialism is a Humanism. Only 1 week, not the extensive journey that we took with Plato and Kierkegaard. And it's difficult for me to leave Kierkegaard and Plato and move on to Sartre. I don't know if these videos are doing you any good or what you're making of them, but what I hope at the very least comes across is that I love Plato and Kierkegaard, and I love those books for reasons I hope I've thoroughly explained. I can't say that I love Sartre, and I can't say that I love this essay, lecture that he gave, Existentialism is a Humanism. I don't love it, but I respect it, and I think that it's useful, and I think it's a pretty good introduction to a certain type of modern thought, and a certain type of modern thought about us, about human beings. So, existentialism, it used to be cool. What happened? I don't know. It used to be very cool. I don't know if it's cool anymore. What do you kids think? But one of the great things about this essay is that it gives you a very nice definition of what he means by existentialism. He asks on page 2 at the end of that first long paragraph, what then is this that we call existentialism? And then he gives you, I think, really very good explanation of that on page 3. Now, I know the page numbers are not coming out with numbers, but if you number them in total, including the last page, it just doesn't have much on it. You should have 20 pages. So when I say page 3, just to be sure, the first line of page 3 should be, the question is only complicated because there are two kinds of existentialists. So if that's at the top of your page 3, then we're on the same page. So what does it mean to be an existentialist, or what is existentialism? He says at the end of that first paragraph, after referring to other existentialist philosophers, he says what they have in common is simply the fact that they believe that existence comes before essence. That's pretty good, and he goes on to explain it, I think, fairly well. What does that mean to say that existence comes before essence? And then he gives you the example of the paper knife. Maybe not the best example for us, because we think of a knife made of paper, but a paper knife, I think, was just a knife that was used to cut open the pages of books. They used to come, you see like an old book, oftentimes the pages will be connected, and you had to cut them with a special paper knife to be able to read the book. But he just uses that as a throwaway example. What's the difference between you and me and a knife? Well, the thing about the knife is that in his parlance, its essence precedes its existence. That is, before this individual thing, and we could use anything for an example. Here, the ubiquitous cell phone. Before this thing, this particular thing, came into being, my cell phone, this cell phone, there were certain ideas that existed of what a cell phone was, and how to make it, and what it was for, and then somebody went ahead and realized those ideas, and here we have the thing. But the idea of the thing, and what it's for, what purpose it serves, what its essence will be, let's say, came before its existence. Now, you and me, we're different. Or you and I, we're different. Why? Well, short answer is because there is no God for Sartre. Okay. So here we have a huge departure, no doubt, from Kierkegaard. And just like Kierkegaard never tried to defend his assumption that there was a God, Sartre makes no attempt to defend his assumption that there is no God. And so one could say that they've just made the different choices at that moment, where Kierkegaard lays out, you have to decide whether you're established by something else or that you're just here. He's made a different choice. For Sartre, we're just here. We're not created by a God. Now, what are the implications of that there is no God? Well, then we can't be like the paper knife, or we can't be like anything that's created with an idea beforehand in mind, and then the thing itself is realized in accord with that idea. He says in the third paragraph of page 3, when we think of God as the creator, we are thinking of him, most of the time, as a supernal artisan. etc., Descartes, Leibniz, blah, blah, blah. Thus, the conception of man in the mind of God is comparable to that of the paper knife in the mind of the artisan. God makes man according to a procedure and a conception, exactly as the artisan manufactures a paper knife, following a definition and a formula. Thus, each individual man is the realization of a certain conception which dwells in the divine understanding. And so because of this, that is, in this conception of man, human beings created by God, it says a little later on, man possesses a human nature. That human nature, which is the conception of man, of human being, is found in every man, which means that each man is a particular example of a universal conception, the conception of man. So if a God creates us, Sartre is saying, then we have a nature. We have an inbuilt nature which is of divine origin, and human beings were created with a certain idea in mind, with a certain purpose. But what if that idea of God goes away? What if that divine artisan who created man, what if we no longer believe in him? He says at the very bottom of the page 3 again, atheistic existentialism, of which I am a representative, declares with greater consistency that if God does not exist, there is at least one being whose existence comes before its essence, a being which exists before it can be defined by any conception of it. That is, this is how we differ from any manufactured article, like a cell phone or a paper knife or a tea kettle or anything like that, is that there was no idea that existed before us in accord with which we are made, or we were made. We simply exist. That is, our existence is primary. That is, first of all, we exist, without that idea in mind. Now, there's no way to, this could not just exist without a previous idea of how to make it, what it was for, otherwise it would be inexplicable. Purposes in mind, etc. Clearly, the cell phone's essence, the idea of what it's for and what it's supposed to be, comes before its existence. But you and me, no. Our existence comes first. That being, he continues, is man, or as Heidegger, a contemporary philosopher, German philosopher, has it, the human reality. What do we mean by saying that the existence precedes essence? We mean that we mean that man, human beings, first of all exists, encounters himself, surges up in the world, and defines himself afterwards. If man, as the existentialist sees him, is not definable, it is because, to begin with, he is nothing. He will not be anything until later, and then he will be what he makes of himself. Thus, there is no human nature, because there is no God to have a conception of it. Man simply is. That is why I'm having us read this to end this class. We have looked at two great works which presuppose that there are some things that can be said about us fundamentally in a universal way, that we have something like in Plato's case, definitely a human nature, and in Kierkegaard's case, definitely a structure of the self. Of course, Kierkegaard makes the important distinction between a self and a human being. But in any case, I think that Sartre's denial that there is anything like human nature is a radical departure from what we're used to, and something that we should take seriously in a modern view, particular modern view. There are, of course, others that we could have looked into. That is a challenge to thinkers like Plato and Kierkegaard, because what he's really saying is that there is no such thing as human nature. We just exist. We're just here. And essence comes after, in the sense that we are is primary. What we are comes later, and what we are is a creation of ourselves. And now we get into the problems. If we create ourselves, essentially, after discovering that we exist, then what are we supposed to do? What are the rules, especially if God doesn't exist? And for Sartre, certainly he doesn't. So that's where we'll pick it up in the next video.